Great. So we're moving on to the section about direct communication with nature. So one way to start this, so I've got a question in the workbook, which is asking you to reflect on what conditions are present when you have the best communication experiences with other humans. So we can use a lot of our existing experience, which will be mostly through communication with the other human beings, to start to orientate ourselves to what we need to do in order to communicate in an effective and subtle way. So take a few minutes to answer that question in your workbook, and we'll see what comes out.
The best communication experience, I think for me personally, it's, well, first of all, you just have to quiet down and really listen to each other, and not projecting your own thoughts while the other person is trying to express themselves. And once both parties open.
Very nice. And you'll find the same thing in nature when we're, which is sometimes like it's harder to do, to not project our own thoughts and ideas about what the answer should be. It's kind of like, it's like communication with other humans, but it has to be a much subtler art because you can't clarify things using words. So yeah, those principles definitely apply. It's about listening and being open and trying to not insert your own ideas about what the answer's going to be or should be or what you want it to be.
So we had a pretty interesting discussion earlier, and one of the bigger highlights was kind of just opening up the space, free of judgment, basically, or any preconceived notions of what a conversation is supposed to be like, and just kind of like letting it flow. And I think and I felt this many times before, when you kind of just allow and welcome a person to speak their truth on behalf of their authentic self. It's you know, all you chances are, like, I usually get more clarity about that person more so than, you know, when it's the opposite of an open, trusting space. And I think in that space itself, it opens us up to kind of, you know, embracing the person as they are, and just kind of being in acceptance, not really in this this defensive mode or position to argue. So that's kind of going off from what Ken said earlier. And I think, and from there you kind of recognize all the beauties in between. And I think that's awesome.
Great. Thanks. And yeah, opening it up to nature as well just opens up a whole new possibility of diversity of authentic selves that might show up for the communication. Yeah, all those same principles definitely apply to nature. I mean, and you can kind of see in your responses, it's not, communication's not so much about exactly what words you choose to use when you speak. I mean, obviously they convey something as well, but so much of communication is about intention, and it can also be very much non-verbal. And we often think about body language when we're talking about communication between humans, but on a deeper level, you know, body language is a way that, you know, we're embodying a certain kind of energy and intention. And it really comes down to that, those two things, energy and intention, with the beings of nature as well. So I wanted to go into how we might receive communication from nature, because that's quite different. So if we're thinking, okay, we want a direct kind of communication, probably the most direct it's going to be or the most similar to receiving communication via language might be through our inner vision. So if we put a question out there, or if we have an intent when we go into our solo time and we're remaining open to see what guidance we might receive, one way that we could receive that communication is through our inner vision, which kind of feels like our imagination. So it takes a bit of practice to really pay attention to when is it something that we're making up in our minds, and when does it have that sort of resonant quality of truth to it. And one way that we might be able to tell is we might feel like an opening in our body. So like when you ask permission and it feels like a yes, it might feel like a warming and opening. You might feel the same thing when you've sort of glimpsed something in your mind's eye. That is an indication of a true response. That's definitely not the only way that people receive communication, and it takes some people are just naturally more receptive and have more of that active imagination that can enable that inner vision to happen. Similar to that is that we could receive communication through dreams, because we're much more open when we're asleep. It can be the best time for communication to come through, and it doesn't necessarily need to be when you're sleeping. It could be a daydream. So when you're on your solos, you could ask a being of nature there, so the tree, for example, you could ask the tree to dream you. So especially this afternoon, because it's the afternoon, you might be a little bit more sleepy. And so you could potentially have a question and ask the being of nature to dream you in order to get a sense of the response. And you can also have dreams when you're asleep at night. And so that's one thing that's a bit of a extension exercise for tonight, is that we're going to experiment with having an intention to receive a dream that conveys some communication. So those methods are quite like internal. The other kind of communication can be through external signs. So when we ask a question, for example, we might suddenly find our awareness is placed on a particular rock or a tree, or some leaves fall, or some dragonflies come to us. And these things can be a response of a sort. Often it's the things that are easiest to move, like in terms of getting that alive, direct response from nature. So, things like the wind, leaves, birds, insects, those things are easier for the spirit of nature to respond to you. So definitely pay attention to any kind of movement, in particularly unusual movement or sounds in the moment after you ask a question. It can be, I would say, more difficult to interpret what those kinds of signs or synchronicities mean. Humans are pretty good meaning-making machines, which is useful in some ways, but we can often feed our own expectations and stories into it. So I definitely encourage to try to not jump to making meaning of something. Like, let yourself remain open and curious to the meaning of these things to unfold. I mean, I found with things that have happened during a quest, and particularly it seems to happen most during the more ceremonial, prayerful kind of times on a quest, that if something does happen that appears to be significant, even if it is something where there's some immediate significance in that moment, it can often unfold in layers and layers and layers over years. So never think that you've definitely got the right answer, or that that's definitely it, because it might just be scratching the surface of what the response might be. And that'll tend to be kind of proportionate to the level, the importance of that question for you in your life in that point in time. I think I've got that. Yeah, and it could also be simple things like inspiration. So if you're asking a fairly focused kind of question and you're looking at a rock with lots of different facets, for example, it might even be as simple as the rock being a mirror for your kind of inner sense, your inner intuition, and you can use like a shape that's present in the rock that you're suddenly drawn to as soon as you ask the question, and that could actually be an inspiration to give you the answer. So there's quite simple things like that, where there's not necessarily a separation between what's your own internal intuition and guidance and, you know, answers more from like your higher self, and what's answers from nature. Sometimes it's very obviously something that's coming more from the external world, and sometimes it's more obviously something that's coming from more inside of us. But there's sometimes blurred lines, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that you have misinterpreted a sign. It just means that, you know, because in reality we're not actually separate anyway. So yeah, there's a lot of subtlety and, you know, difficulty in ever being able to kind of land on what's the particular, sorry, storm got pretty bad outside. What's the particular answer? So perfect timing that I've wrapped up that little section of talking.